The Ambassador Bridge blockade is in full swing. February 10th is the date of the first IRG, so we're fairly advanced in the events of the time period we're looking at. And scroll down. Is that the right document? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Readout of Minister LeBlanc's call with Doug Ford tonight. Okay, so what can you tell us about the call that you had with Premier Ford?
So it was on the evening of February 10th. I remember, as you said, it was following that incident response group meeting. I left Ottawa to fly home to Moncton, New Brunswick, and I had been asked to talk to Premier Ford specifically around what we thought were some authorities the province had in the transportation sector around trucking licenses, permits, insurance certificates. I'm certainly not an expert on the precise regulatory authorities around provincial transportation sectors, but there was a belief that the province of Ontario may have a series of instruments or authorities that perhaps hadn't been brought to bear, whether it was in Windsor or in Ottawa. So it was suggested that I could perhaps reach out to Premier Ford. I have a very constructive and cordial relationship with the Premier of Ontario. I texted him to say I was leaving for New Brunswick and would like to chat to him that evening if possible, and would be at home in 2 hours in Moncton. And he told me to call him when I landed. And I remember being at home. It was about 10:30 or 11 in the evening in New Brunswick. He was still at his office at Queen's Park in Toronto. I said I was calling him to talk about what we thought were some additional authorities that the government of Ontario may have that could be brought to bear with a circumstance in Windsor and obviously in Ottawa. And he immediately went to the process that his government was going through, which ultimately led to their declaration of an emergency order the following day. So the conversation quickly evolved into what Premier Ford was planning to do the following day. And frankly, it went well beyond what we were hoping in terms of some trucking or transportation regulatory authorities. He was very much focused on the economic damage to the province of Ontario and to the country. He talked to me about conversations he'd had with the governor of Michigan, the chief executives of some of the big auto companies, representatives of some of the big unions. He was extremely focused on the severe economic damage to Ontario and to the country. He was focused on the reputational damage that this means in terms of foreign investment into our country. And he was very focused on the public safety concerns and the threats of real violence that people were still continuing to advance in Ottawa and in Windsor. So the conversation, he was quite candid with me about his desire to have the Ontario Provincial Police take a greater role in the Windsor context and also in Ottawa. He talked about his frustration that the situation in Ottawa had not been resolved, and his government was very involved and committed to stepping up, including with the government of Canada, to do what we needed to bring this to a conclusion across the province of Ontario. And I offered, obviously, as had my cabinet colleagues, to provide any federal resources, policing resources, regulatory authorities that the government of Canada may have to support the plan that he outlined to me in that conversation. And the next day he had a news conference which laid out most of what he told me on that evening conversation.
Okay. Just before we leave the readout, Mr. Clark, can we scroll down a little bit? There's just one thing I want to ask you about. Minister LeBlanc informed Premier Ford that the Americans will make it clear that anyone convicted will be barred from entering the United States. Can you tell us what that was about and what did or did not happen with that?
So in terms of what happened afterwards, I probably wouldn't have precise information, but whether it was the Canadian Border Services Agency or the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, who had been having conversations with her counterparts in the White House, Jody Thomas had been briefing the incident response group and a number of ministers around the real concerns the Americans had. I know my colleague, the transport minister, who I think you'll see tomorrow, had spoken to his counterpart, the Secretary of Transportation in the United States. So in those meetings, the Americans we were told by our colleagues or senior officials who had conversations with senior American authorities, including, as I say, our transport minister who spoke to his American counterpart, that they were prepared to do whatever they could to support our efforts to bring this illegal activity, these border blockades, to an end. And my understanding, and if I said that to the Premier, it's because somebody would have told us that the American authorities were prepared to help us if there were convictions of some of these truck drivers, for example. They would look at what authorities they had in the United States to bar them from entering the United States.
Okay. And Minister, just taking you back, the Minister Algabra's counterpart would be Secretary Buttigieg?
Exactly.
Okay. And we'll hear about that tomorrow, I think. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. You can take that one down and pull up ssm.nsc.can 402947. So, Minister, this is, as it's being pulled up, I think shortly after that call, you reported on it to the PMO. And so this is your text where you're conveying the Premier Ford's position, and spoke to Ford. He's going gangbusters on truckers tomorrow, using emergency order, fines, seizing trucks, arrests, suspension of licenses. He's hot to hammer them at a presser tomorrow at 10 a.m. You will introduce legislation to make sure this can't happen again, and wants us to work on plan together to secure border/critical infrastructure going forward. You will then do a presser on Monday to diminish public health measures, but tomorrow is hard on enforcing against blockades. Response comes excellent. So is it fair to say that at this point, whatever happened leading up to this, Premier Ford and the federal government are aligned on an approach?
Oh, very much so. And that, I think, probably was a message I would have sent to the Prime Minister's office following that conversation that evening on the 10th of February. And it's certainly faithful to my recollection of that conversation. What I would do is, as I would talk to or exchange messages with the premiers, I would often ensure that Michael Vandergrift, the senior official at Privy Council office, had a readout of the substance of those calls that he could then circulate as well. But that would have been a message I would have sent to the Prime Minister's office. And I certainly agree with your characterization. That evening, I finished the conversation with Premier Ford very reassured that the governments were going to work together to bring this to a conclusion, not just in Windsor, but obviously in Ottawa. And I would think the 10 or 12 days that followed were a proof point that that was the case.
So both of you are going gangbusters?
Hot to hammer at a presser. I think the context was very much a frustration that what we had seen in Ottawa was now dragging into the third weekend. The border blockages, as I said, at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, were having huge economic and reputational damage to our country. And there was an enormous sense of frustration, I think, in both governments, that we needed to bring these illegal blockades and occupations to a safe and proper conclusion. And the 2 weeks prior to this conversation weren't giving any of us a great deal of assurance that that was the outcome that we were going to quickly achieve.